Hello everyone, welcome to this session where I'm going to look at managing group management reporting using Anaplan. My name's Julia Honigsberger and I'm a Principal Consultant with Thorogood Associates. Today's agenda is going to cover the challenges faced by companies needing to report to group or other statutory bodies on a regular basis. And then I'll introduce the concept of curator and give a short demo of how a solution using this approach and Anaplan technology can overcome some of the challenges that this type of reporting faces. By way of an introduction, and for those of you who don't know Thorogood, we're an independent BI and analytics specialist, and we've got offices in the UK, North and South America, and India and Singapore in Asia. And our work covers a full spectrum of BI analytics, all the way from strategic work, roadmaps, all the way through to maintenance and support. In terms of our technology partnerships, while we're independent, we do partner with a number of BI and analytics software vendors who we consider to be best of breed, if you like. And today, my session's based on Anaplan, which is a cloud-based planning and analysis technology, coupled with the support of Microsoft SQL Server data store. So, onto the challenges of managing group management reporting. A bit of background here to Curator and how it developed. It grew out of a requirement for Lloyd's syndicates to report what is termed core market returns on a regular basis to Lloyd's, who then develop a consolidated view of the whole of the Lloyd's syndicate market. The challenges faced by many of these syndicates aren't solely because of the Lloyd's requirement. They're pretty common to any company reporting on a fixed basis, be it to a regulator or a parent company. What we were seeing is a highly manual process run more often than not in Excel, which is a great productivity tool, but it's got some inherent control problems. It can be difficult to trace how numbers are populated through onto reports, and it can end up like spaghetti, and this makes understanding where the numbers come from really hard. It can be time-consuming to populate and refresh the spreadsheets, particularly when there's a disconnect from organisations' IT systems. And the openness of Excel means that people can make changes without any visibility. Quite often you might find a number simply typed into a cell to override a formula, and there's no audit trail to that. This lack of transparency in audit then places a heavy reliance on the individual who runs and maintains the spreadsheet, who becomes key to the process, and this adds risk if they become unavailable. And finally, companies are needing to respond to an increasingly aggressive close and report timetable. Curator looks to overcome these problems by automating the data load, so there's no manual effort required and there's no risk of manual errors. But if manual changes are needed, these are then done in a controlled way with a full audit and approvals where necessary. And there's clear traceability of where numbers come from, so it's much easier to understand how the numbers are made up. So the aim of Curator is to remove the risk and simplify the process, and really that's in order to leave more time for finance people to actually analyse their numbers rather than spending all of their time collating them. So let's have a look at Curator. First of all, a quick slide overview, and then I'm going to move straight into a demonstration. So the way Curator works is it loads in information from wherever it is within an organisation, be it the ledger, be it in data warehouse, sometimes in spreadsheets maintained elsewhere. But that information is taken into Curator and it's available for viewing in that kind of raw source. But on top of that, Curator builds an analytic cube, if you like, something a bit like a pivot table, which allows you to look at the data against a number of business axes, be it things like parts of your organisation or years of account and things like that. That information is then mapped onto your statutory or company reports, and we'll have a look at how that mapping is achieved, and that can perpetuate not only onto a single report, but it can go from report to report, all under a user's control. So that, for example, in the schema I've got here, I might take numbers from my trial balance and put them onto a report of my assets and liabilities. That may populate my balance sheet, or I might create my balance sheet from my trial balance and my profit and loss. So it can still allow a nice bit of flow through of numbers, but it's in a much more controlled way. No more slide where I'm going really now to have a look at a demonstration and show how an approach like Curator can be used to manage these reports. As I mentioned, Curator uses Anaplan. Anaplan is a cloud-based software as a service, so I'm going to use a browser to access the technology. I've got a link up here which I'm going to use. It asks me to log in. I could use single sign-on, but I've got a login set up. An Anaplan is a great tool for all different sorts of planning, budgeting. So I could have an expense modelling tool, model in here. I could do some budgeting or some forecasting. It's a very open tool and you can use it for many sorts of applications. But the one we're going to look at today is some group reporting. So I click on the link. Anaplan is an in-memory product, so what it's doing at the moment is loading all of the information that it needs into memory. It takes a few seconds, but once it's done that, all of that information is available and it's pretty quick to access. And this is a typical curator landing page. It's got a little bit of reference data up here, tells me what quarter I'm in. This example model I'm using is a quarterly model and we're still in quarter 2 for 2018. The example that I'm using is also based on an insurance company. So we have some insurance company business structures, and I'll talk through those, but they could be anything that your business reports by. I've got some action buttons, and I think on the demo we're going to be talking through all of those action buttons. And then below that I have a list of the reports. So in this example I've got about 12 reports that I need to report up to group, including a balance sheet, P&L, some intercompany, some cash flow. Those are the reports that I have, if you like, as a report pack every quarter to submit. Over here on the right I've got a little table telling me if I've got any errors or warnings, and I'll go into that a bit later, as I will for adjustments. In this example I'm only loading data for one source, which is my ledger, but if I had multiple sources I could see when each source was updated and look at the adjustments for each source, which will produce some adjustments in this demo. So if I want to look at a report, I simply click on it and click on View For. So what I'm going to start with is actually the trial balance. So this is simply all of my ledger data rolled up against my business structures, and this is like a big Excel pivot table really. So my business structures here include my chart of accounts running down on the rows. I've got organisational hierarchy on the columns, some subsidiaries and some main companies, and if I scroll over a bit I get to total company. And on the top I've got the things that in a pivot table you would have put on the page. So for example, in this insurance example I can sell in lots of settlement currencies, so I can look at an individual currency or I can look at all settlement currencies. Again, a bit of an insurance slant. Insurance companies will record their data against a year in which they can recognise it, a year of account. So I can look at it by individual year of account or all years of account. For a manufacturing company, for a packaged goods company, an example there, you might want to look at this by part of your business or by product group, or however you record things in, say, your ledger, if that's where the data is coming from. So a very flexible concept, and in our example we've got year of account and settlement currency. I can look at data in converted GBP or sterling. And one of the other things that I can do is I can either look at the source data, that's the data as it was supplied to me by my ledger. I can separate out adjustments, and we'll create a couple of those shortly, and I can consolidate those into a final number, and that would be the number that I submitted. Also usefully, I've got my cycles, so this is the current cycle, but at the click of a button I can just go and look at the previous cycle. So imagine a big pivot table, and just like a pivot table, if I wanted to, for example, analyse premiums receivable, I can pivot that and maybe analyse that and swap it by year of account, for example, and I get my premiums receivable by year of account. So lots of ways to cut and slice and understand the data a bit better. I'm going to put that back. So we're back now to my sort of ledger view. And in my trial balance, what I can do here is I can look at the numbers either as they were received before any consolidation adjustment across companies. I can add, in this example, 3 types of different adjustment, and those are all aggregated into a final number, which would be the number that's passed through to my balance sheet, P&L, whatever my reports are. So if I pick one of those reclassification entries, at the moment we've got no numbers, but I'm going to access my adjustment slice because this is where I can put my controlled managed differences. And as long as I get down to the lowest level of, say, a single year of account and a single settlement currency, or part of my business, etc., I need to work on my current cycle, you'll notice that I'm not sure how well this is coming across on the WebEx, but those numbers have changed from black to blue, and I can type into any blue number. And because this is reclassification, I'm not overriding my golden source, if you like. I can just type a number in. I might move 100 from one subsidiary to another. So I can start to do some reclassifications across my data. But once I'm happy at the trial balance level that everything is looking good, I can then start to look at my actual reports that I'm going to submit. And I'm going to look today at the balance sheet, and again click on it and the balance sheet opens up. I've got all my drop downs, and I can look at my balance sheet, for example, by all of my business structures, and that's one of, I think, the advantages, is you're able to see often something that you wouldn't have had the time to break down by particular business unit or product grouping. You can look at it against all of those. So here's my balance sheet, and luckily enough everything's balancing at the moment. One of the things that I talked about, which Curator is looking to overcome, is the ability to understand where numbers have come from. And I do that simply by clicking on a number, and I've got a little table over to my left which is going to tell me where that number came from. Now for this particular balance sheet line, it came from a single ledger account. But if, for example, I look at short-term investments, what I can see is that in fact it came from a much larger list of accounts. So I'm starting to get a real feel for where this data comes from, how it's made up. I'll just quickly now have a look at how those are set up, because this is something that's in the control of somebody using Curator. Maybe not everybody, you might restrict it from some users, but we have a mappings capability, and for mappings those numbers came from my trial balance. So I want to see how that's been mapped across. And this is saying, and I've got all the forms that I map onto, etc. But we're going to stick with the balance sheet, which is the gap 1. What I can see, for example, is all of my ledger accounts that fall under accrued investment income, that line there, are going onto my balance sheet as accrued investment income. So it's using a sort of funnel approach to say, either at the lowest account level on the right, or at an aggregate account level on the left, move that through into a particular item on my report, be it a balance sheet, cash flow, P&L, whatever. And if I have the rights, I can just add a different item into there, and that ledger item now will flow through. I'll get rid of that because it will stop my balance sheet balancing. The benefit of mapping at a higher level is that if a new account is added, these very low-level accounts that do tend to be very volatile, it will automatically be included in my report. On the other hand, sometimes I want to exclude them, and I've got a good example down at the bottom here of my actual accounts, where I can see that I've got a line here, an aggregate ledger line, other income, but there's a couple of items in there I don't want to include, and I can exclude them simply by mapping just individual children through onto in the funnel, if you like. So lots of ways that I can map from my ledger to a form, and similarly if I wanted to map from my balance sheet to another form, I could do that with a mapping as well. So all mapping driven and all within the control of somebody with access rights. And that's how we can get to this view of these are the accounts here that are populating the various lines on my report. While I'm here, I'm going to open one other item that's relevant, and that is validations. So Curator sets up as many validations as you need to make sure that your reports are consistent. And if I open the validations module, I can see that for Form 1 we've got no errors, but Form 3.1, for example, has a few warnings. I'm going to come back to those errors shortly. It's basically the assets equal liabilities in this particular case. It's a fairly straightforward one. So in an ideal world, I'd take my data from source. It will be moved through onto my reports automatically. So far, I haven't had to do anything other than set the mappings up as a one-off, and every month, every quarter, however frequently this is being run, those reports will be automatically generated. But one of the things that we heard from businesses when they were doing this sort of thing was that last-minute changes cause all sorts of problems, and that's where you got into people writing into a cell in Excel to override a particular number because they didn't have time. Curator does that through adjustments, and I can see here, for example, I might say that if I look at those unpaid losses, I may know that in fact we don't have that many unpaid loss recoverables. Something might have moved, for example, into paid losses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a movement. I'm going to create an adjustment to move some of my amounts from unpaid losses to paid losses. And if I click on unpaid losses, I can see how it's made up, and I can click an individual line that I want to adjust. And at that point, I can drill all the way into the very detailed data that was used to populate that line. And as you can see, there could be lots and lots of lines that created that from my ledger. I can find the line that I want to change. Let's say, for example, it's that line there. I just have to say who I am. I'm starting the audit trail now because now I'm going to, if you like, corrupt my golden source. So Curator needs you to put a bit more information in which it will retain, both for audit purposes and for journaling purposes. So I could go and adjust that, but before I do that, I'm going to go back to my report and find the matching item that I'm going to move the difference onto. I'm going to move it onto paid losses. Same process, pick an item that I want to adjust. Go in, this time it's picked that item there, and here I might choose to adjust that line there. So I've picked an outwards and an inwards item. At this point I can set up my workbench. So the workbench is a little temporary area where I can go and make my changes and then submit them. So there are my two lines that I picked on my workbench, and it's as simple as going in and adding the number. I'll put in a very big number just so that it's obvious, minus 10 million. In this particular example we don't auto-currency convert, but you could with exchange rates, so I'll just pop the same number in for ease of demo. And I have to say why I'm doing it. And I have to say again here for each of these who I am. So I've moved 10,000 out of my unpaid. I'm going to put it back into this paid line here. And I'm actually going to introduce an error on purpose. Rather than 10 million, I'm just going to put in 9, just so that we can see what happens when that occurs. Again, I'm going to put in that it's a late adjustment and say who I am. So I've added my out and my in. The moment I save this, those changes will now be reflected on any form that uses that ledger item. That's one of the real strengths of this approach, is because we drive the user back to the lowest level to put the changes in, we know that those changes will be reflected on all forms. So I've created my own problem there on purpose, and I just want to have a quick look at where Curator's going to tell me that that's happened. Well, the first thing I can do is I can look at a report. And what we can see here is that the report is telling me that I have a difference of $1 million across all of my adjustments. If I go to my home screen, I can see now that I've got 4 adjustments down here. That doesn't necessarily mean they're an error. That just means I've got 4 adjustments that have not been approved. But what it has introduced up here is 3 errors. So now if I go and look at my validations, what I can see is it's telling me that at the moment now assets don't equal liabilities. I've got a mismatch that I need to clear. How do I clear those? Oh, of course, the other place I would see a problem would be on my balance sheet, because it would no longer balance. But that's something that I might need to remember to look at, so these red flags are very useful. What I'm going to do, by the way, there are 4 here when I only created 2, simply because I've got a year-to-date and an as-at, and it will automatically create the as-at for me and adjust it as I go along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that item, I'm going to readjust it, there it is, and the same process as before, but this time I'll actually correct my problem. Oops. There we go. Same process as before. I could change my comment if I wanted to, but I'll save that adjustment. And now on my report, that problem's gone away of the discrepancy. On my validations, I've gone back to having assets equaling liabilities, and if I was to look at my home page, I can see that I've got no errors. But I've still got these non-signed off adjustments. So this is where I need an approver to come along and approve those. Now I happen to be an approver as well as an inputter, so I will very quickly go and approve those. I'll approve them all while I'm here. I'll just put all OK. Happy to sign those off. And now those you can see are flagged as signed off, and on my home screen I don't have any adjustments that haven't been signed off. So there's a real process here, a sort of hierarchical process around making adjustments. I'm conscious that I've gone very fast, but I'm just going to finish on the control panel just to show that once everything has been completed and I've submitted, I've got no errors, all my forms are complete. They're not at the moment, so that's not ticked, and as a result I'm not allowed to close the cycle, but if I was, then closing the cycle, moving all of that information into a prior period and opening the current period up to new data is as simple as clicking on a box and clicking there. And that information is all downloaded to a SQL Server database to retain history, and all of the cycles are reset without the user having to do any data manipulation, no errors introduced, and you're ready to start your next cycle. So I'm conscious that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of how a framework like Curator can be used to manage group and management reporting. If there is anything you do want to know, or if you'd like to know more about the approach Curator takes, or Anaplan, my details are on the screen, so there's my email address, or you can also reach me at curator@thorogood.com. And if you're interested in Anaplan, I suggest you look at anaplan.com's website. There's some great examples there of how you can use Anaplan for other types of planning, budgeting, analysis type applications. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you very much for listening.